Hey, welcome back to another episode of Newt News Podcast. We're doing another 2024 player profile. And today, the Cardinals made a massive signing. They signed a 3-time All Star, 4-time Gold Glover, 2-time World Series champion that's going to make their lineup so much. Sorry, Andrew. I think I was carrying Mo's water there a little bit. Cardinals signed shortstop Brandon Crawford. Which, I mean, like, if you asked me a week ago if Brandon Crawford was going to be a Cardinal, I was going to be like, no. And then over the weekend, it kind of became maybe a thing. And then Nick got Med signed. Now the Cardinals have Brandon Crawford. So that's new. Kind of the reasoning behind the Crawford thing, we can get into it. But the Cardinals obviously are a little bit worried about their shortstop depth right now. They have Mason Wynn, which they're excited about him, but you never know. An injury could happen, or maybe he does slump. But the big thing is Tommy Edman's wrist recovery has been a little bit slower. And even though he's supposed to be the center fielder, he's their backup option at shortstop. So after Mason Wynn, they don't really have a veteran option or a clear cut option at shortstop. So instead of relying on maybe a Thomas JC or something like that, they went on the free agent market and got Brandon Crawford. Andrew, when you saw the news, were you ready to carry Mo's water, or did you have a different thought on that?
Not really. It was kind of confusing because they already have Matt Carpenter, another left-handed veteran guy. I know Matt Carpenter doesn't play shortstop, but I feel like we could have found some other player to do that. Um, you got Brendan Donovan, who's slotted in at shortstop at times. Thomas JC is going to be working on playing shortstop down at spring training. There's just other options. There's not a lot of other options, which is why they went out and they got Brandon Crawford. But to me, it's just kind of like, why are we adding another 36, 37 plus year old guy to the roster? Why are we taking playing time away from Alec Burleson, who probably is now going to start the season in AAA? Unless Matt Carpenter starts the season on the IL, he got hit by a pitch in his first spring training at bat. So, and he missed his start today. So it's possible, but I don't think that's going to keep him out of the roster. But it's kind of odd to me. I was very confused when I saw it this morning. I was like, "Oh, okay." I didn't think that the backup shortstop rumors were all that serious. But now Brandon Crawford is a Cardinal like 2 hours after all those rumors. So it's interesting. I don't really want to see him get playing time, but I guess he will because he's on the team now.
Yeah, let's jump in a little bit about what are expectations for Brandon Crawford. So you kind of touched on a lot of it already, but for me, it's a depth signing. His role should be is that he plays shortstop when they need him to. When Tommy Edman's healthy and Mason Wynn's playing every day, I think you only really move in Brandon Crawford when Dylan Carlson isn't going to start that day. So maybe against like a right-handed pitcher and Tommy Edman or Mason Wynn need a day off, then maybe that's where or Mason Wynn, I guess, needs a day off because you don't move him around. Then maybe you work Brandon Crawford into it, but it shouldn't be anything more than that. Unless somehow he pops off and is a really good bat, he shouldn't be playing. He shouldn't be a part-time player. He shouldn't be getting a lot of playing time. I think that's the worry is that it could turn into that. I just kind of doubt it with how much they like Mason Wynn. I don't see them sitting Mason Wynn frequently for Brandon Crawford unless there's an injury or part-time concern. I do agree with you on the Matt Carpenter side of things. I think that like signing Brandon Crawford makes the Carpenter signing make even less sense because if Carpenter's the 26th man, it's like whatever, you still have a chance for Alec Burleson to play on the roster. Now you have Ivan Herrera, Dylan Carlson, who have to play on the roster on the bench. And then unless Tommy Edman starts the season IL, then I guess you have an extra spot for Burleson. But after that, like you have Carpenter and Crawford on a guaranteed contract. So it's like, what do you do with Alec Burleson? What do you do with Thomas JC? What do you do with these guys that could be contributors? I think if the Cardinals plan on using a typical 9 or 10, 11 guys most games, it kind of does make sense to not make Burleson sit almost all the time and not get playing time. Maybe it does make sense to play in AAA. I don't know. It just seems a little weird. And if they had gone out and signed Matt Carpenter or just Brandon Crawford, not Matt Carpenter, it'd make a lot more sense to me because whenever Edman and Wynn are healthy, then Brandon Crawford could just be the 26th man who plays in a pinch, gets some random at bats. But that's like kind of what Matt Carpenter is supposed to do. So weird roster construction. I agree with you on the it doesn't make a ton of sense to me. It makes sense because they need the depth, but I think it's like when Lynn and Gibson were signed, one of those guys made a lot of sense. Both was kind of like, do we really need to go that direction? That's how I feel with this. I'm not like I don't hate it, but I also don't fully understand it more on the Matt Carpenter side. Andrew, what do you think are like best case scenario for Brandon Crawford in a Cardinal uniform this year?
I mean, I feel like best case scenario, he like kind of finds like 2021 was super weird for him. He was like by far
Yeah.
his best offensive season, like 140 plus OPS plus, and just a complete
Worth an
anomaly for his
MVP.
career vote. Yeah, that was really odd. And then he completely like slid down. It's kind of like Matt Carpenter's like 2019
Yeah.
or 2018. I don't remember, where he was like just really good out of nowhere, and then the following years kind of slid down. But I don't know. I feel like slightly below league average bat, with solid defense at shortstop. If Mason Wynn struggles, he might find himself starting at shortstop, especially if Tommy Edman is not available to start the season. I could see him getting a lot of starts at shortstop if Mason Wynn has to start in AAA. I don't think that's going to happen based on the way I've watched Mason Wynn play at spring training so far. I feel like he's going to win that spot pretty easily. But if it does come down to Brandon Crawford starting a lot of games at shortstop, I feel like he'd be batting eighth or ninth, and giving you like maybe sub 100 OPS plus, WRC plus, whatever you want to use, at the shortstop position. He's not going to be 2021 Brandon Crawford.
No.
That's just not possible at this point in his career. So I feel like about replacement level as a hitter, and then solid defense is what you're going to get.
Yeah, that's best case scenario for me as well. He's like a replacement level player, gets the job done when needed, but you hope you don't really have to use him a ton. Um, I also a wrinkle in this that I think needs to be thought about with Brandon Crawford signing is they couldn't wait to sign him. If you looked, Nick Ahmed, yeah, signed over the weekend. Rosario signed before that. Kiki Hernandez signed today. Like almost all the shortstops available have signed within the last week, and so if the Cardinals were going to go get a depth move there, they had to do it right now. So maybe if they were able to wait a few more weeks, maybe they would have felt better about Thomas Ajacci, or maybe Edman would prove to be healthy and they wouldn't have done this. But I think so. I'd be interested to see what happens at the end of spring training if Crawford isn't playing well and Sajasi looks good, or Edman and Wynn both look fine, or more so later in the season. Like if it's June and both Crawford and Carpenter aren't playing well, like will they pull the trigger and DFA one of them to bring up one of the young guys? I tend to think now that they have two of them, they'll be willing to do that. Last year was an anomaly. They didn't need to bring up the young guys. They didn't have to. This year, I feel like they're going to do whatever it takes to win. That's the hope, but we have to see it in action. Worst case scenario for me, though, is if something like that happens. If Crawford's not playing well and they have to keep using him and they just keep going back to him like a Taylor Motter type situation and they don't replace him. Again, last year, I think they would have replaced the Motter spot at some point if they were in contention, but they weren't. And they did. They DFA'd him and brought Dion on the roster. So they got rid of him at some point, but then they brought him back because it's like, whatever, we're losing. If they just keep holding on to Carpenter and Crawford when they need better players on the roster, that's worst case scenario for me. I don't even care if he's bad, if he's not playing and they don't need him to be. But if they need him to have a role on this team, or they have someone in AAA who could have a role on this team, but they're not calling them up because we paid Brandon Crawford, whatever. I don't think the terms have come out yet, but it's only a year, or we paid Matt Carpenter the league minimum. That's a huge mistake. So that to me is worst case scenario. Do you see anything else? Like, is that worst case scenario for you, or is there another way this could go bad?
Yeah, I feel like Taylor Motter was about as bad as you can really get. He was playing all the time, taking up at bats from guys who probably deserved it more than him, and was kind of just in the lineup randomly for no reason. And I feel like Brandon Crawford, that's just like you can't really get much worse than that. And I feel like I could definitely see a possibility where we're just like, oh, okay, he's in the lineup again. What's going on? Why don't we call up Thomas Ajacci or whoever to fill that spot? And yeah, I mean, ideally, Tommy Edman is healthy and he can fill that spot. But I feel like the more I hear about this, the more I'm worried that he might not even be back until like, I don't know, May. I don't like he was supposed to be ready for the start of the season, but now it seems like that they've gone a completely different direction for who's going to be backing up shortstop. I highly doubt now that he's going to be on the opening day roster, at least not on the IL. So I feel like that's what I'm more concerned about than anything with this signing.
Yeah, and actually, as I was thinking about it when we were talking too, there's a chance that Edmund doesn't really play much shortstop now, because if Dylan Carlson's the only backup outfielder they have, they need Edmund to get rest days to also play the outfield consistently. So they can't have him playing shortstop on days where he would be off from center. Like he might be a primary, like not just like the center fielder, but pretty much only play center field now. Brandon Crawford fills in at shortstop every once in a while. So I think that worst case scenario also plays into the health and performance of Wynn at Edman, because if Wynn's playing well and he's able to play almost every day, then you're not going to really see Crawford ever, because they're not going to put Crawford at second base or third base unless it's like a random pinch situation. And if Edman's playing in center field every day, it's fine. If Wynn gets hurt, Edman's going to slide there, Carlson will go to center, and they'll move around. Crawford's not going to be the starter unless he's just raking for some reason. I was looking at splits. He was awful against both right and left-handed pitching last year, so it's not even like there's a platoon thing there. But who knows? Maybe he was just like he was really, really bad last year. If he can even be close to like slightly below league average replacement level, that's fine. Let's round this out. What do you think, Andrew, Brandon Crawford will do in 2024? We talked about expectations. We talked about best case, worst case scenario. If you're predicting Brandon Crawford's 2024 season of the Cardinals, what's your reaction to that?
Honestly, I don't even know if he makes it to the All-Star break on the roster, because Tommy Edman has to come back. Burleson's going to probably earn at bats at some point. Victor Scott's coming. Thomas Ajayce's coming. I don't see how you can give at bats to Brandon Crawford and Matt Carpenter while allowing those guys to come up without like major injuries happening. So I feel like if you have to cut bait between one of Crawford and Carpenter and Tommy Edman is healthy and you have shortstop options, you have to cut ties with Crawford, right? Unless he's like playing much better than Carpenter, which I don't really see either of them playing that well this year. Because Carpenter, you just respect him more as a franchise like cornerstone for so many years. You don't want to like cut ties with him so abruptly in the middle of the season. So I feel like Crawford plays like 20 games before getting cut at some point. I feel like at least that's my hope. I feel like that's we'll know more as we know more about what Edman is going through.
Yeah,
I've heard that he's progressing a lot better as a right-handed hitter right now, and he's actually delayed in his recovery as a left-handed hitter. So maybe, hopefully, Edman just decides to give up left-handed hitting altogether, which he did against some righties last year. But that's a completely different thing. We'll do that when we preview Edman. But if Edman can make it back by like May, I feel like Crawford doesn't make it to the All-Star break.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. I'll say Crawford doesn't make it through the season either. I think he's like not quite replacement level, but he's fine enough to play like it's whatever. But I just have so much confidence in the talent of a Thomas Ajayce, a Victor Scott, those type of guys, that I think at some point in the midseason, like if Victor Scott forces his way onto the roster, Edman's available to play shortstop and center. So like that makes Brandon Crawford not needed as much. If Thomas Ajayce proves that he can play shortstop, at least for stretches, not necessarily be a primary guy there, but he can play it as the secondary option, then I think that gets rid of Brandon Crawford as well. But I do think if they end up leaning more toward a style, which I think they're going to do, of they have their best 9 guys and then they have Herrera and Carlson that fill in every once in a while, I don't really see them using Brandon Crawford outside of the occasional rest day for Wynn. And then same with Matt Carpenter. I don't think either of them will play that much. Crawford maybe more so than what I thought Carpenter would. So I could see them being on the roster most of the year just because they aren't going to play much. But we'll see. Injuries happen too, so that could always throw a wrench in this. But that's our profile on Brandon Crawford. I don't really know if it's worth talking more about it other than that's the news from this past evening. I don't know when you'll be seeing this, but obviously it's a talking point right now. We have more player previews to come. So if you liked this and want to see more Cardinals content, more videos, player profiles, podcast episodes, subscribe to the Newt News podcast, and we will see you guys next time.